Whoa. Are we good? Can you hear me? Hey Shinju, can you hear me? Okay, cool. Wow, echo or techno. Okay, cool. So I assume we're live. Okay, let's do this. Awesome. So hey everyone, how's it going? Actually, let me just toggle back quickly just to make sure that things are working. Okay, cool. Awesome. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thanks everyone for joining. I know that today's Super Bowl Sunday, and you know everyone just likes to take a weekend off, so I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. Today we're going to discuss ETH2 validator economics in the sense of what they exist and how they operate, how they function. So we're going to essentially walk through some high levels of you know, what is the beacon chain and some of its components, which was previously explained, but we'll continue to kind of keep those high level, and then we'll dig more into the design of the system and how rewards are calculated and how they're emitted, and then ultimately walk you guys through the ETH2 calculator, which we made at ConsenSys CodeFi, which offers you an insight as to what is the network level rewards given a set of variables, and then ultimately some cost assumptions around you as a validator in preparation for phase 0, which is coming up. So let's get it kicked off. So here's the kind of the overview of what we're going to tackle today. We'll start with, you know, what is the beacon chain? It's not something that we'll go too in depth, as the guys from Prismatic covered that really well. We'll talk a little bit about validator requirements. What are my responsibilities as a validator? Some fun facts, which I think also help kind of get your mind in the right place, and higher level things that I'm trying to keep this. It's a very complex system, so explaining the rewards is kind of an iteration over time as to how to make these things simplified. So there's some cool fun facts that I think will help get everyone's mind in the right place. We'll then talk about the rewards and their drivers, where they come from, you know, what are the different sensitivities that they have, and then ultimately how that ties to the individual validator. We'll talk about some anticipated phase 0 rewards with some graphs that were produced in the calculator, and then ultimately I'll walk everyone through the ETH2 calculator and kind of show you how it works and the benefits that it brings and what its capabilities are. To start the chat, I dropped my link for the model into the chat. So if anyone wants to jump in and check it out in the meantime, please feel free to do so. And cool, let's get it started. So this is, you know, kind of a widely used, I guess, graphic of the system. If you've been following ETH2, it's in my opinion still the best visual representation of how the system is designed and what its main components are. You know, the primary coordination layer of all this is the beacon chain, which is what you know, bootstrapping of the beacon chain is what phase 0 is. And we'll get into the types of things that happen inside of the beacon chain, but this is still to date the best high-level overview of the architecture of the system. So let's talk about the beacon chain a little bit, keep it high level, and just kind of talk about the things that happen inside of it and its purpose. It's been referred to as the coordination layer. It's been referred to as the spine chain. It's essentially just, you know, where all the action takes place, all the most important tracking and state and everything, and rewards and penalties, it all takes place inside of the beacon chain. So at a high level here are the few things that take place inside of it. The beacon chain tracks state of validators and shards. It manages the registry of validators. It provides randomness through RANDAO for a few different reasons, primarily assign validators to committees and then choose validators for block proposal. This is also where rewards and penalties are calculated and dealt out. And then ultimately when shards are a thing, this is also where the cross-link processing will take place. So let's talk a little bit about phase 0. It is the most near-term thing, and it's, you know, the initial bootstrapping, in my opinion, it's the heaviest lift, and, you know, the most important part, and also an integral part of layering it into phases has to do with proof of stake. So if we think about proof of stake, it makes a lot more sense to have security, you know, being provided and tested before people are allowed to use the network. So we can think of phase 0 as this bootstrapping of validators and getting people to join and test the system. And it just makes sense from a proof of stake perspective. It's the best place to start. So for phase 0, there will be an ETH2 launchpad, which is actually something that the EF is currently working on with Activate. This is going to be a application where you will become a validator for the first time, and it will take you through the steps, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's where you exchange your ETH1 for ETH2. Right now, it's anticipated for the second quarter of 2020. I definitely would leave it more on the shoulders of the guys at Prismatic or some of the other client teams to have a better indication of where that target deadline is, but things are most definitely trending in the right direction. For phase 0 itself, let's just talk about a threshold that currently exists and has been talked about. Right now, to hit Genesis, we need 16,384 validators in the system, which at 32 ETH per validator, which is the requirement, that results in around a little bit over 500,000 Ether staked in the network for Genesis to get started. What will be taking place inside of phase 0 is that Casper FFG will be applied, and ConsenSys will run. Validators and their stakes will be managed. Rewards and penalties and slashing will take place. Hopefully there's no slashing, but we never know. And then also organizing and electing committees and proposers, which is also done through the RANDAO process. I think it's also probably more important to talk about what's out of scope. So there's no token transfers. There is no withdrawals in phase 0. There's no two-way bridge. There's no EVM. There's no smart contracts, and there are no accounts. So at its base and core, this is like I explained earlier, the bootstrapping event of getting validators to come in the system, provide security, make sure it's secure and resilient, and then continually phase other functionalities of the network in over time. So let's talk a little bit about what my requirements are as a validator, and what are the types of things that I need to do. Again, there will be a launchpad process, an application launch for when this hits mainnet and testnet, and for people to participate and become a validator inside of ETH2. Step 1 is depositing 32 ETH into the deposit contract, which was actually recently formally verified. And then basically sends it to the ETH1 chain, and your ETH1 is burned, and in return, you get BETH. During this process, you will generate a key pair offline. So this process is very technical, you could say, because it does require you to understand how to manage your own keys, and you will generate 2 pairs of them. There's a hot and a cold. That's a bit out of scope of what we'll talk about today, but that's one of the main things that you'll do in that flow and process. And then ultimately after that, once successfully in, you'll be added to a queue to wait for your turn to become a validator. The other 2 things that are required for this is a beacon node. This can be a laptop, a desktop, a VPS, or some server hosted by a centralized party as well, Amazon or whomever. You can think of a beacon node. It's very it's exactly likened to an ETH1 full node. This maintains the view of the beacon chain. And then the other requirement that you'll need to make this a reality is your validator client of choice. This handles the single logic of a validator. So this is Prism. This is Sigma Prime. Pegasus is also working on something as well. So it would be up to you to pick and choose which one you would like to run, or a variety of ones to diversify risk, which we'll also talk a little bit about later. So let's talk about responsibilities. Like what am I supposed to do? What are my main jobs? How do I remain truthful and follow the rules? And how do I get rewarded? There's 3 things that takes place here. 2, one is a subcategory of the other. There's two main things. The first main thing is creating attestations, which you can think is voting on the head of the chain, or more simply, signing new blocks. This happens once per epoch, and that is around every 6.5 minutes. Inside of that process is also aggregating attestations from validators in the same committee. This happens occasionally, and the other primary one being to propose new blocks. And this also happens infrequently. And we'll get into these a little bit more in detail as we go through. So here I think is a good time to kind of talk about some of the fun facts. And I guess the way that these should be interpreted before we walk through them is these are high level things that will give you a better understanding of how the machine works and when you will be rewarded and how they're calculated and the timing of these things, and also the dynamic nature. Because in this ETH2 setting, it's based on the way that things are designed, which we'll get into more. It's difficult to know exactly what my rewards will be. So these kind of serve as a guiding force to that. So, number one, ETH2 is a pure proof of stake environment. There's no delegation function. So everyone who is a validator in theory needs to have the asset itself, but then also provide resources to the network as well. ETH2 is designed to accommodate hundreds of thousands or even millions of validators. It's kind of true to its decentralized as possible design. Rewards minus your penalties are transferred to validators every epoch, which is 384 seconds, or as we talked about earlier, roughly every 6.5 minutes or so. And I think an important thing too, which kind of took me a while to get sorted in my head, it's rewards are calculated based on the state of the network upon epoch completion. So there are certain drivers that we'll get into next, where one of them is, total ETH staked in the network, and also average percent online of every validator in the network. In that 6.5 minute time period, things could change. So my reward isn't the moment I, become a validator or the moment I am selected to propose or attest. It's actually once that process is completed and we look at our behavior plus the state of the network. I also think that it's important to think of this in a non-fixed number environment. The rewards inside of ETH2 will be highly variable by design. One of the main components of that is that validator rewards are proportional to the square root of the total amount of ETH staked. So a simple way of saying that is that the less ETH staked in the network, the higher the reward, and the more ETH staked in the network, the lower the reward. And we will get into those things here. So let's talk about our different reward types. We have our proposer reward, our attester reward, and our whistleblower reward. Our attester reward, again, just tying back to some of the things we talked about, it's a very simple form. An easier way to think of this is signing new blocks. This happens every epoch. Actions required is that I need to include attestations from other validators. I need to include proof from a whistleblower if there is one, which eventually will end up getting a validator slash. So this is essentially, while attesting, I'm also here to help clean up the streets of ETH2, you could think of it, and kind of police the bad guys. Reward type number 2 is the proposer reward. These individuals who chosen to do so, which is done through the RANDAO process, they're in charge of block production. This happens infrequently compared to the attester reward. There are 5 actions required to get base reward in this setting. First one is getting attestation on chain, agreeing on the history of the chain, agreeing on the head of the chain, getting attestation on chain quickly. And those 4 there, before I get to the 5th one, those 4 there will exist in phase 0, and then the 5th one will exist in phase 1, which is pointing to correct block and assigned shard. Once shards become attached and live and more mature, this will then be included as the 5th component of getting this reward in the system. Reward type number 3 is the whistleblower reward. I think this is pretty straightforward. These are individuals who are inside of the system who are policing the system and looking for people who are acting maliciously, and we'll get into some of those behaviors as well. But ultimately, if you are the one that brings that to the table and then you push that to the attester, there is a reward for policing the system as well. And hopefully this happens infrequently, but TBD. Now let's talk about the drivers of, when people think about rewards and proof of stake, it's mainly okay, so this is what I have. What am I going to get in return for doing this? It's people take a very fixed mindset approach to it, I believe, and I think that's kind of the way. I think it's easier for people to understand a fixed approach or a fixed issuance or a fixed reward. However, there are drivers in ETH2 that make it more dynamic than other networks, and we'll talk about how that ultimate end reward is driven by some of these macro factors. So to my comments earlier, first and foremost, total ETH at stake. Again, this is kind of the proportional thing that we spoke about earlier. If there is less ETH in the network staked, then the reward is higher. And if there's more ETH in the network staked, then the reward is lower, in a dynamic environment allowing for equilibrium and free markets to basically meet themselves and allow validators to figure out what makes the most sense. So here on the chart is, we can see at the bottom here, this is total Ether staked in the network from 100,000 to 1 million. This is kind of what I've been pictured in my mind, is I've been thinking about in the phase zero sense, like, how do we get to our first 1 million ETH stakes, and what does that environment look like, and how will things be behaving inside of that environment? So this issuance here is gross, so this doesn't include validator cost, which the model includes, and we'll go down that rabbit hole in a little bit here. But essentially, this is 100K to 1 million ETH staked in the network, and as you can see, it's at 46%, and then it works its way down to 15. And again, these numbers aren't perfect and whole and round. They won't be like they are presented here today, but this is just to show what we can expect at the highest level based on its design. Second one being average network percent online. I think this is a very, very interesting design element, in my opinion. It's likened to like a collective incentive mechanism where if the network and aggregate itself is providing more uptime, then everyone participating in that system is also rewarded more. So it incentivizes all of us to provide uptime for each other, and I think it's quite smart. So again, with the dynamic nature of what the rewards are, and we'll see it in the model when we go through it, but it helps to lay out things in grids like this, because it will be highly diverse, and it just allows you to kind of look at things from a broader perspective instead of specific numbers, because it is very dynamic. The third one being base reward factor. Before we get into that, I think it's important to basically re-acknowledge that this is very fluid and dynamic. This is very fluid and dynamic, and will probably honestly change every second or every minute. From an aggregate perspective, the base reward factor is a fixed. It's a fixed number. It's currently at 64 in the spec as of today. I've like sensitized it a little bit and increased it just to kind of see where things are at. It is not dynamic, it is fixed. However, if it has some of the most sensitivity to changing the reward. So if, for example, if someone didn't love the rewards of ETH2 and wanted to propose that there would be a change to them, taking a look at what the base reward factor is one of the, in my opinion, at least one of the main like low-hanging fruits to poke at and figure out if you agree with it or not. So let's talk a little bit about slashing and penalties and what will exist inside of phase zero. We won't go too in depth into this from a mathematical perspective, as the model only applies and assumes an honest validator. But we'll just talk about them because I think it's important for everyone to kind of have some acknowledgement about them. So let's start with slashing. The classic double vote, which is likened to a double spend. It's the proof of stake version of that. This is when a validator votes for two different blocks in the same epoch. This is punishable by slashing, you could say. And then there's a secondary one that's tied to it, which is called the surround vote, which is essentially that instead of just voting for two different blocks, a validator votes for multiple at the same time. And it's done in a manner where you actually don't really understand whether or not the first version that they attested to, whether or not they believe it's the truth. So the surround vote is actually something I'm actually learning more about myself, and it's quite interesting because I've never thought of it from that perspective. I just thought it was the double spend. There's also non-malicious slashing. So let's kind of talk about this a little bit. So this can occur to a bug or a mistake or something that's not malicious, but ultimately still doesn't provide the uptime that the system needs. One of the main design elements of ETH2 is, providing that uptime and always being available as it wants to, in the mission of it becoming the global settlement layer or the globalist or the global trustless provider. Uptime is, crucial for all these things. So there are elements of this built into it. So like, let's say that there's some type of bug or code error, and a group of individuals get slashed. This penalty is light if it's a small number of validators, and the amount of stakes slashed is proportional to the amount of validators that were slashed around the same time. So it really just takes into consideration the exact environment of where this happened and took place. These slashings are a minimum of 1 ETH. However, it's important to note that if there are a large number of validators slashed at the same time, then I guess the difference between large and small numbers are still, as far as I know, unclear, or at least they're unclear to me. However, if there's a large group of validators that all do something and it's similar, and it is considered to be on the lines of malicious, non-malicious, or slashing or inappropriate for the system, then it actually will result in, depending on what that environment looks like, full slashing of total stake and then a forceful exit from the system for that validator. So let's talk about offline. As I explained, average network percent online is one of the main drivers of the economics, but it's also something that obviously you have to incentivize, to not do, but also protect against the downside in the event of a large majority of validators going offline. So there's a set of incentives and disincentives around this big design parameter. And validators with 32 ETH staked are not penalized in the event of downtime from the perspective of I'm not going to get my base 32 ETH that I have staked. I will not get slashed. However, I will miss out on potential rewards. And that's if I have a power outage, if I want to switch my infrastructure to something new, or whatever the case may be, that's not a heavy punishment. However, if the punishment will increase if there's more than 1/3 of validators go offline, and this is kind of where the term of inactivity leak enters, and this is what this means. So the way that the system rebalances itself is that it will reduce the balance of the offline nodes over time, so that the ratio of online validators to total validators can once again exceed 2/3. So it can continue to finalize blocks, and the chain will not halt in this setting. So it's a self-rebalancing mechanism where if you are in that environment where you are offline and there's a bunch of other people offline, then there's the chance that you will be punished for that quite heavily, but in the attempt to rebalance the system. So let's talk about, now we'll get into some numbers. We'll kind of talk about some of the outputs that we did in the model, and we'll show some graphs, and then to close it out, we'll also jump into the model at the end here. So let's talk about the graphs that we're going to look at and what the assumptions are made. At the network level, the assumption is that there is between 100,000 and 1 million ETH staked. The average percent online for the model, we ran at 90%. The base reward is equal to 64. And ultimately, there are no network fees inside this environment because it is phase 0. Validator assumptions on the side of the individual, which then comes into kind of what the biggest benefit of the model that we put together is that it provides cost assumptions, which we've spent quite a bit of time on. So those assumptions are individual validator, 32 ETH staked, individual uptime of 98%, a $250 piece of hardware with a 2.5-year useful life, router and ISP or sunk costs. We consider that to not be a thing to pull out of what the rewards are, assuming that most people already have those. And in the event that we want to run multiple validators, which is a scenario that we will also touch on, it's assuming that you can run 16 validators per machine. As there's the separation between the beacon node and the beacon client, therefore you can stack multiple beacon clients on a node. The limitations of how many you can do is not technically unclear to me. However, I look at it more from a risk perspective, and I think that people who are validating need to more pay attention to the risk of putting a certain amount of ETH onto one individual beacon node instead of like diversifying that across. So let's just talk a little bit about some outputs here. So again, we're going to look at two graphs here. The graph on the left is the one from earlier. This is just network level. This includes no cost whatsoever. This is just what the token on token would be individually for the validator. And this is from 100,000 ETH in the network staked all the way up to 1 million, high of 46% at the 100K mark and a low of 15% at the 1 million mark. Our graph on the right here includes the cost assumptions that we just spoke about. And you can see that at that 100,000 ETH level, the validator should expect, somewhere in the realm of 43% after costs have been considered. And at the 1 million level, around 11% with costs considered. This is kind of the whale scale. We've been running some numbers and trying to figure things out from. We do believe that at the beginning of this, that it will be very, strong supporters of the community will be a part of this, and they will want to run multiple validators. So inside of the model, you'll see some graphs and some charts that represent, running multiple and what your rewards could be. So our assumptions here are these rewards are measured at 1 million ETH in the network staked. Average percent online is 90%. Our base reward is 64, and it assumes that between 1 and 50 validators are run. And again, no network fees because this is for phase 0. And this is the at-home approach. Inside of the model, there's a VPS, at-home, and gross approach. We'll get into those. And this assumes that you're running at home with your own machine, whether it be a laptop or desktop or whatever it may be. So that kind of takes me to the end and kind of, what exactly are we doing with the ETH2 calculator? What have we been working on? We have a Telegram group. If everyone wants to join, the model is also posted in there, and there's some good discussions, and we've had some good traction on it so far, and I'm interested to kind of see those discussions increase. We've been working for a while now on taking the calculator itself. It's part of a holistic, larger ETH2 effort that we're working on as Activate. One of the components of this is the calculator and education. So right now what we're working on is taking the calculator and building it into an application that users can actually use and interact with that has advanced settings and beginner settings, but it also includes an element of education to it as well. So that's currently in development for us, and it's something that we're looking forward to putting out in connection with some of the other ETH2 efforts that we'll be doing, which would be public soon. So please, if you guys are interested in joining the Telegram group and getting part of the conversation, we're actively doing a lot of user research as well on this, front to figure out for this initial phase 0 and beyond, how do people feel about it? What is unclear to them? Do they have reservations? How excited are they? And then ultimately how we as Activate and ConsenSys as a whole can help this effort from an education perspective and the user facing. We're doing a lot of things at the code level as ConsenSys, but this is kind of our education user interface effort around ETH2. Just kind of to close it out before we get into the model, I just want to give a huge shout out to these individuals who helped with this process. It's been a multi-month iteration. One of the things that we struggle with inside of ETH2 is exactly like what the source of truth is. And I think that all the people participating in ETH2 will get better at what the source of truth is. But I think it's right now the source of truth, comes from those building it. And so part of our effort is ETH2 effort with Activate as well is to just make sure that what we put out there moving forward is the source of truth. These things are changing rapidly, but we think there's a big need for a source of truth, and that's kind of why we've linked up with certain individuals to enable this. Here's my information personally, my Telegram, my Twitter, my email, if anyone would ever want to reach out and ask any questions or anything, and then ultimately as well at ConsenSys CodeFi, you guys can come check out a lot of the different things that we're working on. We're doing great stuff in the DeFi space. We're doing great stuff in the token launch space, and we're getting more formal with what our efforts are inside of ETH2. So now what I'll do is I'll kind of just walk everyone through the model and show it to them real quickly, and then we'll do questions. So let me escape from my screen real quick. And then let's go here. Okay, cool. So I'll walk everyone through what kind of the model looks like today. And really, I guess what I want to focus on most here, and I'll let everyone dig into, I guess, the protocol level math and how the machine is tied together. But ultimately, I think I just want to walk through like the cost assumptions, right? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that in all networks there's not like a lot of hardware requirements for a lot of this stuff in blockchain, especially at the protocol level when it comes to validation. So, walking through this and walking through the cost, I think is important. So, there's this first box here. Anything in blue can be changed. And then this is basically an input, and anything in black is an output. So that's kind of the way that you should look at it. So these can all be changed. For example, like I said, base reward is fixed, epoch length is fixed, slot time is fixed, shards is fixed, e-circulating supply can be up to you. Average network percent online, that can be customized. Total at stake can also be customized. Validator deposit 32 ETH, that's fixed, and then the price of ETH, which is I currently put in at 190. So those are the network level things, and then those push through to this right hand side over here, which is kind of the output. Now let's kind of talk about the validator assumptions and what the cost side of it looks. There are toggles here where, like, if you already have internet, it pulls it out. If you already have a router and you select yes, it pulls it out. And then you can choose between a VPS and a non-VPS option. So basically, we've put in the VPS at, let's say we have a VPS. We've currently put that in, I believe, at $20 a month. And again, the model is designed for 16 validators per machine. So this will really, and this also, all these other things here, like, if your computer hardware, you want something more expensive, please feel free to put that in. You can toggle your validators run here, useful life, all those different things for the watts and the global kilowatt hours. That was something interesting that we went through, but we basically did like a massive global average of essentially like the most participation at the ETH1 level on the full node side that we saw from a country perspective. We included all those countries, and I believe it ended up being either 12 or 13 different countries. So that's kind of what it looks like. And right here, this will give you what the network level reward is without any cost. But if you ultimately want to see what it is for you as a validator after you customize your cost assumptions, this is really where you want to be looking, is down here at this area. So I'll also show there's a few graphs and charts in here that I did not include in the presentation. So I'll kind of just show everyone those. This first section here is, you can think of as gross economics. This does not include any cost to the validator themselves. This is just purely what the network is spitting out. And again, due to the dynamic nature of the rewards, we think it is better to look at these things in grids. One, to understand how the system will behave, but also to just get a better gauge if you wanted to figure out a granular anticipation. We believe that they're better to look at in ranges. So this is gross economics. A couple of these charts here I didn't go through in the presentation, but like pretty self-explanatory. Again, behavioral in nature is kind of what we hope to achieve here, is just understanding how the machine works. Here's the next section, which is your net economics at home. Everything matches. We're looking at the same metrics and statistics, just with different cost assumptions. And then our third box here is net economics, assuming that you use a VPS. So that's what the model looks like. This is the most up-to-date tab on this. I recently updated this, and then we have a couple of other tabs here. This one as well is all of this is the same, but this is more like beyond phase 0. If people want to begin to get into that, there's a ETH burn calculation built into the model as well, which is kind of out of scope, but I think I'd bring it up. Like if you wanted to basically try to simulate like 1559 being a reality inside of a mature ETH2, you actually can in here. So for the purpose of the short term, looking at this first tab inside of the model, is the most relevant and the most important. And then anyone can, this is open for free for anyone. Please feel free to make a copy. We think it's really great when people make their own copies and kind of get into the weeds and then, have a debate about it. That's kind of part of this whole effort. The economics themselves haven't been widely discussed, in my opinion. They've been talked about, but it's difficult for the people building the machine to actually have a great outside view on what the economics are. So this is our effort to be transparent, do the best we can to get it in front of people. These are systems of incentives, so people care about the rewards, and it really, I do believe to some degree, will drive the intentions of certain individuals to participate in the system. And if we want ETH2 to be successful, we need broad participation from millions of validators, hopefully at a mature level. So yeah, this is the ETH2 calculator, and again, I just want to give a shout out to everyone who's helped in this process. I want to give a shout out to Shinju and the team. This is really great. This is a conference that we've been super excited about because ultimately, doing more with less, I think everyone needs to try to do, and this has been really great and educational. So we'll kind of open it up for questions now. Okay, where do I start? Let's see. Echo. Could you send slides? Yeah, and I'll send slides out to everyone when I get done. Spreadsheet. It's not been shared. Yeah, and I'll share slides afterwards with everyone as well. Let me actually just drop that in there right now while we're doing it. So 1% ETH staking expected at high end. Hopefully we get to the 10% range is kind of more of between 10 and 12% at a mature level is kind of the way that I've looked at it, not 1%. Share the slides. What could cause a large number of validators to be slashed for the full amount? Yeah, so I guess the way I've interpreted this is broad scale collusion. Essentially, I mean, to attack proof of stake, you need a broad-based coordinated attack to do so. So, full slashing would be a coordinated attack, essentially, which would result in full slashing and automatic exit. Full amount is very harsh. I mean, look, there's a lot of debates. We've actually been having this debate internally at Activate with team members about how we feel about 100% slashing and what the case is in that event. I mean, I think 100% slashing is strict. However, I'm pretty neutral on it. I agree that it's strict. I don't know if it's right or if it's wrong. But consensus on 100% staking outside of Ethereum as well is a big topic that people are also talking about. Compound reward payment, yeah. So there's this whole effective balance discussion that I actually didn't go into because I just felt it was a bit out of scope. But I would recommend everyone to look at Jim McDonald's articles that he's recently put out on effective balance, and I think that will, and I can also share and follow up with that. I think that would be something that would help you better understand the ability to compound and what that looks like. Let's see. The base reward universally equal set to all validators, or validators be organized in different tiers? Base reward is based on behavior, and base reward is also based on collective, network uptime as well. So the base reward is the base reward, and if you act non-maliciously, then you will get the same thing as everyone else, and then everyone else is also enhanced additionally to that base reward of how much you receive of it based on that total network uptime. So then that ties into that collective incentive mechanism where everyone still receives the same base reward, and it's tied to those two different things. Oh, sorry. Let me make sure that this link is open. Apologize. Change. Okay, cool. Everyone should be able to access it now. Let's see here. Why not freeze for a long time instead of slashing? I don't have an opinion on that. But I think that's interesting. Yeah, there's the effective balance. Okay, cool. That kind of rounds it out for questions. So again, thanks everyone for participating. It's this is an exciting topic. 2020 is going to be a super exciting year. So I'm really looking forward to all this taking place. There's going to be a lot of different networks going live, including ETH2, and really looking forward to multiple of these digital conferences as well. So again, shout out to the team who put this on. Happy to be a part of it. Hope everyone enjoys their Sunday.
I just realized I said a lot of words while muted. So anyways, Collin, thank you so much for this presentation. It was really great. And I'm going to share your slides and also the Excel spreadsheet with people who didn't attend. So in case like you guys lose this links, like you'll get it next week. For our next session, we have Rocket Pool. They'll basically be walking people through how to spin up a validator on ETH2 Beacon Chain via Rocket Pool. So wait around till 2 o'clock. It should be a pretty good session. Is there one last question you want to answer? Collin?
Yeah, there's just one question. I think it's an opinion piece, but I think it's an interesting question because it's a widely debated thing. I'll just give my 2 cents on it. And it's about DeFi competition for phase 0. So I think that's an interesting topic. It's something that we're actually, part of our user research is actually to find those things out from people who actually utilize their tokens. We're in this chapter now of where a lot of people have the thing, but we're trying to figure out how are they using it, what do they want to use it for, and where do they want to use it. So part of that process has been looking originally at DeFi, which then ended up getting a lot of ETH2 feedback. So then it became a ETH2 research effort. And I guess my gut tells me that right now in DeFi, the rewards that you can receive in tokenless protocols is nowhere near what you can receive inside of phase 0. However, the user experience of using your tokens with a tokenless protocol like Compound or other things of that nature is much easier for the user, whereas phase 0 will still be quite technical in nature. But I don't personally see on the DeFi side, unless people have a reason to borrow, I don't see those lending rates, which is right now the only other, I guess, competitive option that what you could do with your ETH. In my opinion, until in the real economy, people can begin to use digital currencies for actual things like purchasing things or for other real like economic use cases, that the rates to lend ETH specifically will be quite low. So I don't personally see that in the short term being a competition to it. From a reward perspective, because I just don't think that makes sense yet. However, from a user experience perspective, there are definitely technical hurdles to participating inside of phase 0. But then again, like I said, there's some things that we're about to come out with that we've been working with the EF, and it's like an ETH2 launchpad and education flow, walking users through what it takes to become a validator. So we're doing our best like we can, but I think if there were any competition, it would be user experience perspective. Also, and just a last note on this, in ETH2, since it's non-delegated, unless you are giving your tokens to a qualified custodian who has ETH2 infrastructure set up, you do have to host your own resources. So that's also kind of on the cusp for individuals. It makes you take a step back and kind of say, oh, like this seems difficult. And then, humans are ultimately lazy. So TBD, it's a kind of a long-winded answer, but yeah, I agree. It's a big question. I don't think we have a final answer for it yet, but in the short term, it's not a concern of mine. Okay, cool. We'll give everyone a little break before Rocket Pool then. Okay, cool. I think that is it.
All right, guys. So I'm going to let Collin leave and just hang around for 15 more minutes, and we will have our next ETH2 session. Thank you again. It's been amazing.